Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Cop Talk. I'm Kevin Schroeder, your host. I'm here with my co-host, Captain Nat Mamet.
Hello, WABC listeners and YouTube viewers. Here we are again with another interesting guest.
So today's guest on Cop Talk is Whitney Tilson. Whitney Tilson is a Democrat who will be running for mayor in New York City. Whitney, welcome.
My pleasure. Great to be here.
So, Whitney, why don't we start off by telling our audience, our listeners, a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I have a little bit of an unusual background. My parents were one of the first couples to meet and marry in the Peace Corps, so I grew up in Tanzania and Nicaragua, and ended up in my parents sort of settled down in the U.S. in Massachusetts for my sister and my teenage years, and met a New Yorker 35 years ago now. Up in Boston, and like any good modern husband, followed her down here to New York 31 years ago, and been here ever since. So I had lived everywhere for the first half of my life, and the second half of my life have been here in New York and fallen in love with the city, and we've raised 3 kids here, and now I'm running for mayor to try and improve my city.
Okay. Well, that would be my next question. What made you decide to run for New York City mayor?
There were a number of factors, but mostly I would say I love the city. I think it's headed in the wrong direction. Like, I'm really worried. And we'll talk more about that, I'm sure. And rising crime and people not feeling safe in the city is a big factor there. And I've been very active in the Democratic Party for more than 20 years. I'm a lifelong hardcore Democrat, but I'm fed up with how badly my party is managing this city. And so I'm running as sort of an outsider insurgent candidate against my own party to try and drag my party back from the far left, sort of ideologically. And I'm a business person. I know bad management when I see it. And so I'm trying to fix both bad ideas and bad management that my party is practicing here in New York.
So you're a common sense Democrat then?
I am.
Okay.
It used to be most of us, but I feel like a rare breed these days.
True.
Do you know Judge Weinberg? He works upstairs. He's a common sense Democrat.
Yeah, well, I'll have to meet him.
He was a Supreme Court judge for a number of years, and he's on the radio quite a bit. He works for John Catsimatidis.
Okay.
So perhaps you'll meet him.
Yeah, please introduce me.
You know what's interesting about you? Your parents were Republicans, right? And one of your, I think your grandfather was.
Yeah, not my parents. My parents were sort of '60s lefty, Peace Corps types. But my great grandfather actually served in the U.S. House of Representatives for 24 years, representing Connecticut. He was Speaker of the House. Majority Leader in the House as a Republican, representing Connecticut. So I never met him. He passed away before I was born, but he and my grandfather were both dyed-in-the-wool, old-school Republicans from Connecticut.
Oh, okay.
But I've grown up in a Democratic household my whole life, and even when I'm fed up with my own party, I don't switch parties. I try and fix my own party.
Gotcha. Yankee or Met fan?
I probably shouldn't say this, but growing up in New England, my grandfather was a lifelong Red Sox fan, and he passed away before they won their first World Series. But, I grew up, with him. That was one of the ways we bonded. And so I came down here as more of a Boston sports fan. But over the 30 years, particularly after 9/11, I grew to stop hating the Yankees. I knew where I was when Bucky Dent's pop fly went into the screen, when Mookie Betts' ground ball went through Buckner's legs. That's what I grew up with in New England. But now I love all the New York City sports teams and cheer for them. And in fact, my middle daughter worked for a couple years right out of college a couple years ago for the Knicks and Rangers.
Okay.
And so, she often got us in to see some of the games.
Oh, great, yeah. So Ranger fan and Yankee fan.
Yes.
You're not the typical candidate for mayor. You're a businessman. You're a hedge fund person.
Yeah.
You have an interesting background. So what makes you think that you would do better than the other candidates running for the Democratic position for mayor?
Well, I'll start by just pointing out the obvious, which is look at how badly the career politicians are running our city. The bar is low. But look, I went to Harvard Business School. I've spent 30-plus years in the business world. I've started a half dozen small businesses here in the city, and my specialty in the investing world was investing in turnarounds of big broken companies. So in every case, successful turnarounds had a new CEO at the top who brought in a team of great people, a combination of the best people who are in the system, but also new blood as well. And so that's the kind of turnaround I'm going to do for one of the world's largest organizations, New York City.
Well, you know, running a municipal agency is quite different than running something in the private industry. Years ago, when when we had the budget crunch in the 70s, there was Richard Shin. I don't know if you remember that name. He was from Metropolitan Life. He was put in charge of running the city's financial programs. And he said that he was shocked at how different public services from private industry. And he was a sharp guy. Yeah. So I hope you're aware of that. It's not that easy to transition over.
Well, Bloomberg did it, right?
Yes, that would be my model, I think. And I have been warned that in both the city government and the state government, it's a bizarro Alice in Wonderland world in which what's in the best interests of the people of the city and the state just never is even on the table. It's all about, which interest group is going to run attack ads and, deliver votes for the next primary or whatever. And so I'm going in with open eyes as to what a broken and dysfunctional system it is. And I think the voters, though, recognize this. And the only possible way to change this system is to have an outsider. I just don't believe anyone from within the system can reform the system.
Correct. Well, it hasn't been working, so you're right.
Well, you hear this constant comment that Washington is a deep state. Well, it's a deep city because the people that run the government, not the elected officials, they're civil service employees, and they're quite entrenched.
Yes.
So you have to deal with the civil service system, which is not easy.
Yes. And then you have on top of that, I would argue New York, the cradle of democracy, has in many ways ceased to become a democracy. If you look at, you may be wondering, why is the mayoral election in 2025? Why is the primary, which effectively elects the mayor in a heavily Democratic city, why is it on June 24th? Why is it a closed primary so independents can't vote? And the answer is that's the way the Democratic Party machine sets it up to minimize turnout such that, and it works. Last election, only 26% of registered Democrats voted, which meant Mayor Adams effectively was elected mayor by winning the primary in the 8th round of ranked choice voting with 404,000 votes in a city of 8.8 million people. So we got a mayor who was elected by 5% of the people of New York. That doesn't sound like a democracy to me. So that makes it hard for an outsider like me to win, and that's the way the party machine likes it. So my strategy is I have to go straight to the voters, and particularly the 74% of voters who didn't vote last time, eligible registered Democrats who didn't vote. And I think the reason they didn't vote is just different flavors of career politicians were their options, and so they're like, it doesn't matter, they didn't vote. So I want to go to them and say, well, this time, one, it does matter, and two, you've now got an option, someone who's a change agent, someone who's not a career politician. So I've got to get my message out there.
Well, crime is generally up. I heard you talking before about the statistics.
Sure.
They may be down this month, but who knows what's going to happen next month.
Right.
Now, in one of your platform, you talk about reducing violent crime.
Yes.
Can you tell us about that?
Sure.
How you would do that?
Sure. Well, let's start with the statistics because Mayor Adams is lying to everybody by saying, I just was at an event with him a month ago in a room full of CEOs, and he said, quote, New York is the safest large city in America. And that's not true no matter how you measure it. It was as recently as 5 years ago, thanks to the great work of officers like yourselves. New York, after decades of progress, had become one of the safest large cities in America, depending on how you cut it, maybe in the top 5. And that was great. And New Yorkers, cops were heroes. New Yorkers, quality of life improved for all of us. Since then, the 7 major felonies are up 52% on average. So it's not your imagination. Mayor Adams is cooking the statistics, and we've become a lot less safe. It's even worse on the subways. In the last 5 years, felony assaults on the subways are up 150%, up 2.5 times. So what am I going to do about it? There's a long-term and a short-term strategy. Long-term, if you guys know this, but I don't think the average voter does, which is if you just read the papers, you would think that crime is random. It's not. It's highly concentrated. If you actually look at where it takes place over the course of a year, about 4% of the city blocks account for more than half the crime in all of New York City. These tend to be the areas where the schools are failing, there aren't good after-school programs, NYCHA's not doing a good job running the housing project, there aren't enough mental health professionals, the street lights are broken, et cetera, right? So that creates an environment for crime. So the city has to do a lot better job and invest in the areas that are being most poorly served by the city that's leading to crime. But that doesn't solve the short-term problem. The number of police officers in New York City, as you know, is down by about 10% in the last 5 years. The fact that crime's up a lot during that time period, that we're at a 34-year low today in terms of number of officers. We're understaffed, and we've got to get back at least to where we were 5 years ago. And lastly, every cop I talk to tells me how demoralizing and frustrating it is that when they know who the bad guys are, and they go out and they arrest them, and it's on camera, et cetera. But anything short of a major felony, I said to a cop, I was like, yeah, they're out like a week later. And he laughed and he said, it's the same day. Like 70% of misdemeanors aren't even charged in Manhattan at this point. So we've got to stop that revolving door. And that's partly working with the DAs, but also legislation like bail reform and discovery reform in particular that were well-intentioned but went way too far, and basically, if I were to summarize it, I would say we got to make crime illegal again because we decriminalized almost all sorts of crime, and not surprisingly, we're getting a lot more of it.
Do you believe in the broken windows theory?
Yeah. When small crimes go unpunished and you have an open-air drug market in Washington Square Park and people just walking into retail establishments and looting them and there are no consequences, of course, I think that's a major contributor to the 7 major felonies, up 52%.
Yeah. Whitney, it's true what you're saying in regards to the manpower for the NYPD. Each day, the NYPD loses experienced personnel.
Yes.
What would be your plan to recruit as well as retain?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure you know, but I'll share this with your listeners. I was shocked to read the number of people applying to become NYPD officers has declined from 18,000 in 2017 to 8,000 today. It's off so it's not just your good people are demoralized and leaving, but not enough people are coming into the pipeline, and it's always been very selective. Only 1 out of every 8 applicants gets picked. Well, when you had 18,000 applicants, you could have 2,500 new people coming in, and that was maintaining, if not growing the number of officers. But when you only have 8,000 applying, that's a problem. So you've got, roughly speaking, more than 200 a month leaving and only 100 a month coming in. That's why the number of officers have come down. So I think it's a function, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this as well. You're close to this. I think that revolving door I was talking about, one of our mutual friends told me, I felt so good, like we were heroes for decades as crime went down. And the last 5 years, I feel like everything I've worked my life for, we've given back, and it's demoralizing and causing veterans like that to quit. So we've got to fix the laws where officers are doing their job, but they don't feel like it's making a difference because perpetrators are right back out. I've heard there's an issue with overtime, where as the number of officers shrinks, there's been a lot of pressure for overtime, and if that overtime, sort of goes back down, whatever you retire with, it was just the last 12 months of whatever you got paid. So there's almost like a financial incentive that is encouraging people to retire quickly because they got a lot of overtime last year, right? I think we should fix that and maybe spread it out over the last 3 years, or whatever your peak pay was in the 5 years before you retire, something like that, because we certainly don't want to incentivize, your veterans to retire quick to lock in if they see their overtime going down this year, right? And we don't want cops working tons of overtime, right? I also think
it's also a safety issue when you have a cop working 14 hours.
Yeah,
he's a little tired. I mean, now something happens in the 15th hour, that could be a problem.
Yeah. I also think the fact that we're on our fourth police commissioner under Mayor Adams in the last 3 years, and the prior 3 have not been very effective. I've heard good things about Jessica Tisch, but I think a lot of cops are retiring because they feel like there was just corruption and incompetence at the top and throughout city government, but obviously particularly in the NYPD. And so I hope Jessica Tisch coming in, getting rid of some of the bad apples at the top, will provide a better environment that will both keep good people in the system and start to turn around the numbers of people applying to come in.
You know what's happening too with, personnel leaving with over 20 years is they have a good year with overtime because there's no one there, so they have to stay for overtime. So they have maybe X amount of hours a year. And now the next year they cut the overtime.
Right.
There's no incentive to stay because now your pension is going to go down.
Well, that's the thing, because it's all based on your last 12 months before you retire.
Right.
So I read somewhere like 400 detectives retired just in January of this year. And we've got that's sort of crazy. Like, that's created an unintended consequence that we should fix.
Right. There's no consistency. So I mean, it has to. Again, like I said, you have a lot of overtime this year.
Yeah.
You have you're on the job 21 years.
Right.
Now your overtime goes down, say, from 50 hours a month to 20 hours a month. Okay, better quality of life, but now your pension's going down. So that's what's happening.
Right.
As far as recruitment, I believe the maximum age you could be is 30 years old to come on the job today, I believe. Maybe raise it to 35, which has been at one point, or 38 years old.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, also with retirement, mandatory retirement for NYPD is 63. Maybe raise it to 65. Because there is guys I know who had to go at 63.
Sure.
They're in good shape. They're doing a great job, and they're out the door.
Yeah.
So I mean,
I'd love to. Ed, you're 88. Did you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd love to have
pass.
you keeping me safe on my block.
Yeah, give Ed a pass. Yeah, Ed for commissioner.
Yes.
Well, what you said before about the low numbers coming into the department, that has to result in a lowering of standards. Because if you're going to be desperate to hire people, right now it's a 2-year college degree. It's retired, unless it's changed. But to get them to come in, you're going to have to lower standards, which is dangerous.
Yes.
You lower standards, you're going to have major problems.
You bet.
So one thing leads to you have another unintended consequence.
You bet. Yeah, because one of the things you don't want to do is say, okay, we need 2,000 people, and there are only 8,000 applying, so we're going to all of a sudden take 1 out of 4 instead of 1 out of 8. You've now just really lowered your standards.
Well, the civil service rule is 1 out of 3. You have to hire 1 out of 3. And even if all 3 are bad, that's a civil service requirement when you take the test. You didn't know that, did you?
Okay, because the number I read, maybe we're talking about 2 different things, is the number of people who actually become police officers relative to the number who apply was pretty consistently over the years. Only about 1 out of every 8 applicants actually became a police officer. Am I wrong about that?
No, that's something else. But I'm talking about the civil service rule is you have to hire 1 out of every 3 candidates. And if all 3 are bad, you have to take one of them. So you have to take the least of the worst. That's the civil service rule. And before you talked about changing the retirement overtime system, you would run into union opposition. See, this is another part of the deep city. You have to deal with the police unions.
Right.
And a lot of the perks that the police have now were hard-won through labor negotiations.
Right. But what I'm talking about here, the unions would love, which is I'm saying if you got a lot of overtime last year and it might go down this year, we're not going to cut your pension. We don't want to incent you to quit and retire early if you're still willing to stay and do the job, particularly at a time when we need as many police officers. So I think the union would love what I'm proposing. I'd have to figure out, what the cost of this is, but it's like most of the pension systems I'm familiar with don't create this weird incentive where if you have one really good year, you better retire quick to lock in, that 1 year where you had extra comp due to overtime, for example. I
mean, there's many police officers, detectives, bosses that we know on the job that because they had a good year, they left. They didn't want to leave. They were still young and healthy. But, and they were doing a great job.
Right, and they're worried that they got to live the rest of their life on that pension. They face a 20% hit to their pension if their overtime goes down.
You don't mind staying status quo every year, but you don't want to go down. I mean, it's ridiculous. So that's a problem.
Yeah,
and that's something we figured out. What about hiring residents of New Jersey? For instance, I know you can take the test. You could be in Texas, take the NYPD test, and you come on a job. By the time you come on a job, you have to be living in, say, the 5 boroughs, or Nassau, Suffolk County.
You have
Orange
to be
County.
a New York resident. Is that,
How about
yeah.
maybe for a certain time you could still live in Jersey resident, be a Jersey resident, because
Interesting.
there's a lot of guys who do come on a job from Jersey,
Yeah.
and they have to move in the city, and the rents are crazy.
Yes.
They have to get their own apartment.
Yes.
And forget about if it's Manhattan, 5 boroughs.
Yes.
So they wind up living,
and they're paying a congestion pricing tax coming in, which when I found out the cops in the Midtown North precinct were paying $9 a day to come in, I was like, how is there not a waiver for city employees like teachers as well coming in?
First responders. As of yet, no, there isn't.
Yeah,
and
there should be.
That's tough on, especially a rookie cop making that much money, $9 a day to come into work.
Yeah.
I know the fire department, same situation. And I think it's it's throughout the all city agencies.
Yeah, I'm open to. I like how you're thinking. Changing the age minimum and maximum. Maybe the first you have a waiver for the first X number of years you can live in New Jersey, but eventually you got to come to New York.
Yeah,
I don't
sure.
know.
But not day one.
Yeah, but we're clearly facing a real crisis because it's not just it's been going on, but it's accelerating at this point because of the overtime from last year. The retirements have spiked just in the first month of this year.
And then as you had experience with the Midtown North Detective Squad recently, as you were telling me your bicycle was stolen. Right. Sorry to hear that, but I'm sure it'll be returned. And hopefully get the perpetrator as well. But in dealing with, say, the Midtown North Detective Squad, I mean, they're down to maybe 18 detectives. They used to have 32 detectives. I know, say, the 5th Detective Squad in Chinatown used to have 15 detectives. They're down to about 7. So, and it's not getting better. So, because you can't put police officers in the detective squads to get their shield eventually, do investigative work when you don't have the police officers to put in those squads.
Right.
So it all goes back to, recruitment. So if you have 500 kids coming into the academy, maybe 400 come in, and maybe 250 stay on the job because they go to Port Authority, Fire Department. It's a better quality of life right now, and also much more pay.
Right. I also saw an interesting idea. I was down in Union Square, and I saw a guy dressed in a security outfit, a hat, and sort of looked semi-official, but clearly wasn't NYPD, standing just on the other side of the turnstile. And I asked him, what are you doing? Just was talking to him, and he said to supplement the police. It turns out stopping, a lot of the people who are committing mayhem on the subways are the guys jumping the turnstiles. And so by putting a much lower cost person who doesn't have the power to arrest, but is a deterrent, that was a sort of a low cost way when you're understaffed on the police, where you can supplement them in a way that enhances, the safety underground.
Right.
I thought that was a good idea. I mean, I looked it up. It's apparently a small pilot program, but I think we should do that on a larger scale.
Well, I live down that way. Maybe I'll check it out myself.
Yeah. And it was sort of nice. Like people were going up to him and just asking for directions, like tourists. Like it was a good thing in other ways too.
And also on that note, like say. A lot of small towns upstate New York, even in Long Island and in New Jersey, I believe, they have police officers, part-time police officers, that, they help out the situation and the manpower, but they're part-time police officers. They do maybe 20 to 25 hours max a week.
Okay.
And most of them are former law enforcement or military.
Right.
So
and they're
of course
lower cost because they've already got their pension or whatever.
Exactly.
That's not an issue.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's, it's another idea.
Kevin would know more about this, but there is a plan, other states use it, where retirees are brought back to the department. It does not enhance their pension, but they do what they did before. I think Kevin.
Yeah, that's called the DROP program, the deferred retirement program.
That would be a way of helping the problem out.
Did you ever hear of the DROP program?
No.
Okay, so Whitney, the DROP program, as far as I know, it's basically, I have friends who do it in Cleveland and in San Diego, and I know they were trying to do it under Giuliani, and it didn't work out. But what happened is the way it works is you do your 20 years, okay? If you want to leave at 20, your pension's locked in.
Right.
They freeze it, okay? And then you're hired back doing everything the same hours, same position, same all the above, at a salary of X amount, okay? So you gain salary, and also you gain your pension. You're not losing your pension. So you're keeping the manpower, you're keeping the experience, and the police officer's happy because he's getting his pensions at some point. I think you could do a 3 or 5 year contract, I believe.
Right.
That's as far as I know about it. But I know they did look into it in New York City on the Giuliani, and it didn't go. But I think it's something to be looked at again, maybe.
And it could ease the overtime problem. The cost of overtime is enormous.
Right. So is the idea here, like last month, more than 400 NYPD it's been the past few years, been about 200 a month have been retiring. And some of them just want to lock in the best pension that they can get. The idea is then to offer them, hey, come back. You can still keep your pension, but keep working. We need you.
Right. You freeze your pension. Right. I'm not sure how it works with interest and all that financially. But you hired back, because most cops retire to go get a second job anyway. I mean, you don't retire and go to the beach. I mean, you have to put kids through college and all that. So you start a second career, whatever that may be.
Right.
Whether it's part-time work or a big job, director of NBC Sports.
Yeah.
And so now you would work out a salary, say it's, whatever it may be, a year.
Right.
I'm not sure how the overtime will work, probably overtime as well. And you're hired back, and and that's
U.S.
it.
military does this. A buddy of mine from high school worked down at Camp Lejeune in North Carolina, has family there. He qualified for his full pension, retired, and then they just hired him back as a civilian.
Right.
And it was a win-win because the military benefits from a really experienced guy.
Yeah.
And he wasn't, after 20 years, he's still a young guy. He's still got 20 years of work ahead of him.
Sure. And cops who don't want to leave, but they can't stay because they don't want to lose money in their pension, they just, like I said, it's working in Cleveland and it works in San Diego, amongst other states.
Yeah, great idea.
You mentioned the 4 police commissioners.
Yes.
My next question would be, who would you consider? I know that's sort of an interesting question.
Right.
But what qualities would you, not only who would you consider if you have someone in mind, but what qualities would you seek in a police commissioner? And I hope you're not going to get involved in DEI. Was it DEI?
Right.
DIE.
I think this would be, let's say, a year from now almost, or 11 months from now. At that point, Jessica Tisch will have been in the job a bit longer, and so the first obvious consideration is do we have a good person in place, and should we keep her? I haven't met her. I've heard really good things about her. The only knock on her really is she's not a former officer herself. If I could clone someone with her sort of managerial background, and it's so sad to even have to say, like someone who's not corrupt, because Mayor Adams is not only corrupt himself, but he's 26 of the top people he's appointed have been investigated under indictment or resigned in disgrace. Across his administration. I mean, what a disaster he's been. She has all sorts of. Look, the NYPD is one of the largest bureaucracies in the world. It's by far the largest police department in the United States. It's $11 billion. Budget. So having someone with good managerial background who's honest and super competent and who can act independently and can bring in great people and get rid of some of the rot that was up there in management. So the question is can we find someone with all of those characteristics, but also has the beat cop experience? I'm not sure. Right. But don't look a gift horse. What's the saying? Don't look a gift horse in the
mouth.
face, like in the mouth. Excuse me. Yeah. If you've got someone who's doing a great job, keep her there. But I'm not pledging that. I'm just saying that's obviously would be the most obvious thing to consider. But then see if she is wants to continue in the job, and look for someone like that. But obviously you'd rather have somebody who's been out there, has the credibility of being out on the streets. Whitney,
would you consider bringing back the quality of life crimes and enforcing the quality of life crimes?
Yeah. The answer is you don't want to send someone to Rikers the first time they go in, they steal a bottle of shampoo or something like that. I think at one point we may have over-criminalized small crimes. Certainly the extent, a couple decades ago that stop and frisk went too far, and you ended up harassing a lot of innocent people and alienating the communities you're trying to protect. That said, the pendulum has now swung way too far the other way. And we've, invited chaos into our city, and I'm furious about it. Every New Yorker I talk to is furious about it. Every police officer who's trying to do their job and keep their community safe is demoralized and angry about it. And so there are a number of things I think that have to change. California, I think, is a good model. They were 5 years ahead of us in decriminalizing small crimes. They passed a ballot initiative 10 years ago called Prop 47, and you saw the chaos that then emerged across California. And so last November 5th, there was another ballot initiative, Prop 36, that basically said, for example, if the third time you go in and commit a misdemeanor, a petty larceny, rob something, steal from a store, third time it's upcharged as a felony. If a gang of people, 3 or more people, go in and commit a crime like that would individually be charged as a misdemeanor, but if it's a gang of people who do it, 3 or more people, they're all charged with a felony first offense. Someone who's dealing fentanyl that kills somebody can be charged with murder. It was basically Prop 36 sort of rolled back half of what had passed 10 years earlier that had resulted in chaos. We need to do something like that in New York.
I agree. I totally agree with that. And, Cap?
A lot of the things you say sound great, but they're not easy when you're dealing with the New York State Legislature.
Yes.
Because, a lot of these things require state approval.
Yes.
And right now, the legislature we have is horrible. So,
yes.
They passed some very restrictive laws that really tie up the police.
Yes.
Which brings me to another question. Would you be able to, or would you want to fight to get a lot of this legislation changed?
Yes.
For example, qualified immunity. You have it both at the state level and the city level. And Dopey Adams went along with it. He said his lawyers told him to do it, so he signed off on these bills. Mm-hmm. You have the chest compression problem. Think of yourself as a police officer struggling with a violent prisoner.
Yes.
You can hardly touch them. If you put your hands on his chest or you compress the chest, you wind up getting charged with a crime.
Yes.
So you'd have to take on the state legislature.
Yeah. I think I will have to be a good politician. I'm going to have to go spend time in Albany with the mayor and the legislature, and a bit of it is city council as well. The extra enhanced sanctuary city that City Council passed in 2014 and 18 needs to be rolled back. The plan to close Rikers is flawed and needs to be fixed. So those would be 2 city council laws that I'd have to also be spending time with those folks. But you're right. New York, things that really relate, you would think, just to our city actually require state legislative changes. So I would absolutely, the bail reform law, getting rid of bail without giving judges dangerousness was insane. We are the only state to this day that does now not allow a judge to consider defendant's dangerousness in a pretrial detention decision. And that when that law passed, the trade-off was always get rid of bail, give judges dangerousness, and fix this flaw that we were the only state that had it. And instead, the far left got hold of this, and they got rid of bail, but said, we don't trust these old racist white judges. They'll be disparate impact. We want to maximally de-incarcerate. And therefore, so they didn't give judges dangerousness. And in the year 2000, the law went into effect January 1st, 2000. That year, 100,000 people who would have been incarcerated pretrial were instead released into our streets, with no judge able to determine whether they were a danger to us or not. That year, the number of murders in New York City went up 47%. Now, some of that was the pandemic, but the national murder rate went up 15%, and it went up 47% in New York City. This is an example of one of the pieces of legislation that needs to be fixed, but also sort of good intentions run amok. When you have a one-party city and a one-party state with no opposition party, it tends to get hijacked by extremists.
What about the parole board? The governor appoints the members of the parole board, and they released about over a dozen police killers. What would you do about that?
Yeah. Well, that's a state thing, I suppose.
I understand, but as the mayor, you still could say something.
Well, I'll tell you, in the parole area, one of the 8 pieces of legislation that collectively went too far and made us a lot less safe was called Less is More, that made it much harder when someone who's been released on parole, and if they've returned to a life of crime and are committing crimes, they should be sent back to prison, of course. And it was by making it a lot harder, the recidivism rate is sadly very, very high. We should be trying to do as much as we can to get people on the right path, both while they're in prison and give them support and so forth so that they can, get their lives back in order and become a productive member of society when they're released. So we do a terrible job of that. But the reality is if somebody's released from prison and they go back to a life of crime, they need to be quickly picked up and put back in prison, because they were released under conditions of parole. And so that piece of legislation needs to be fixed as well.
You sound like a Republican.
It's funny. I haven't changed in the decades. I've been a law and order Democrat, and both politically, but also just rationally, I want to live in a safe city. And we Democrats are getting clobbered on this issue because we went too far. And when both major and minor crimes go up 50%, voters are going to crush us.
As New York City mayor, would you give the NYPD permission to work along with ICE to get...
Took the words right out of my mouth.
There you go.
Yes. And this is another area I differ with my Democratic friends, which is I support New York's original sanctuary city legislation dating back to 1989, which came in under Koch and under Giuliani and Bloomberg and all, which basically protects, says, if someone who's in this country illegally, they bring their child to school, they break a leg and go to a city hospital, they are the victim of a crime or have witnessed a crime, they can go to the police station and report it. We want these things, right? You don't want just honest, law-abiding people, but who are undocumented. You don't want to be sweeping them up. It would create chaos. So that's the basic sanctuary city law that existed. In 2014, 2018, the ultra-left city council went way too far, passed additional legislation that basically precluded all communication and cooperation between city officials, most importantly police, and the feds in cases of people on the terrorist watch list, people who were wanted for murder in other countries, or people who were picked up for committing serious crimes in New York. And as part of this, the ICE office at Rikers was closed right in the beginning of 2015. This all went way too far. I think anyone who is not a citizen of the United States, who is in this country, is here as a guest. It is a privilege, not a right. And you better behave yourself, just like I behave myself when I'm in somebody else's country, right? And I don't care if it's a Swiss banker who's committing financial fraud and is caught for that. Don't let the door hit you on the way back to Zurich, right? So when I read about this migrant Venezuelan gang member, migrant here last year, you probably heard about it a couple months ago, where he terrorized one of Alvin Bragg's ADAs, sexually assaulted her, robbed her. They caught him because he was so stupid he carried her phone and kept it on, so they were just able to track him down. The icing on the cake is he was staying in a taxpayer-funded migrant hotel. And it was his 7th arrest last year. And I don't understand why on the first arrest he wasn't handed over to ICE and deported straight back to Venezuela. So again, I feel like I'm not anti-immigrant. I'm a descendant of immigrants myself, but this is common sense. If somebody is in our country and they're not a citizen and they're out there creating mayhem, I'm not talking about broken taillight. They've decided to join a gang or something. We can't get them out of our country, out of our city first, and our country second, fast enough.
So you would untie the hands of the NYPD to assist with ICE?
Yes and no, because I don't trust, under Trump, honestly, I worry that they're just out there just trying to sweep up, people who've been here a long time, who may have American kids, who are working hard and never broken a law in their lives, right? By and large, by the way, the undocumented immigrants or illegal immigrants in this country are super law-abiding because they're very worried about getting picked up for anything, right, that could get them deported. So to the extent that ICE has a list of people who are known criminals, known gang members, we should absolutely cooperate with them to arrest those people.
Right. We've had the regional director of ICE on this program twice.
Yes.
And it's not as simple as people think. You just can't pick them up off the street.
Yes.
They are entitled to due process. And it could take, I think he said it could take up to 6 months or more to deport someone because they have the right to go through hearings and whatever, even though they are here illegally.
Yes.
And his policy at the time, he said they would go after the known criminals first.
Right.
But that doesn't mean others would not be subject to deportation. Now, let me tell you one thing. You mentioned Koch before. He was the first one. I remember I was in the department at the time. He issued an executive order stating that the police would no longer have anything to do with the Immigration Naturalization Service. That was by executive order.
That was the original sanctuary city in 1989, right?
Probably around that time,
Yeah.
yes. Now, heretofore, it was in our regulations, the department regulations, that if you came across a person who you suspected to be here illegally, you would hold him. You would notify Immigration and Naturalization. They would come down, do a check, and then the person was gone, and you never saw them again. Right. Koch changed that.
Whether they were doing anything criminal at all.
Correct. If they were here illegally,
yes,
they were taken by INS, but the police were much involved. Now, my take on this is that the police are always coming in contact with these people.
Right.
And I don't see why a police officer who knows that a person is here illegally shouldn't be able to do something about it. You know, we're not saying to go out and look for them, but let's say a traffic violation. You stop somebody for a traffic violation, and you look at their papers, everything's wrong, and you clearly believe that they're illegal. You should be able to hold them for immigration.
Yeah, I'm going to respectfully disagree with you there because let me throw out a situation. A woman who's here illegally is raped. She can't go to the police and report that, hey, I've been raped and I know who the guy is and he's still out there and he might rape somebody else. Do you want to actually, because she's here illegally, if she goes to the police and reports the rape, and they'll be like, okay, can you show us your ID? She doesn't have ID and she gets deported. Would you want that?
Well, I don't think you would ask her outright. But
just what you're talking about, it wouldn't be hard to figure out. She's undocumented.
Well,
right?
It's a tough question. I understand that. We all have families.
So one of the guys, let's say one of these guys, a lot of them are working in construction, right? That's a dangerous job. He falls off a ladder. He breaks his leg. He shouldn't go to a city hospital to get a cast on his leg and should just sit there at home with a broken leg, right? Because he's afraid to go to the hospital because that's a city department. He could get deported, right?
Right.
It's a complex question. So, look, I think we have our hands full tracking down the people who are committing crimes like the Venezuelan migrant gang member and all. Let's focus there. And, I do worry about, sweeping up 12 million people in this country or here illegally, I think would crater our economy, spike inflation through the roof. There would be lots of unintended consequences.
Good. Whitney, to all listeners out there who are eligible to vote in the next May's race, what would you say to them for them to vote for you?
Well, first I'd say register as a Democrat. You have about 3 or 4 more days, and you can do it online because if you're an independent or register as a Republican in New York City, very pragmatically speaking, you're wasting your vote. You're being disenfranchised by the system here. So you're allowed to switch your vote right back. So switch your vote so that your vote counts because whoever wins the Democratic primary on June 24th is about 90% likely to be our mayor, right? So in terms of voting for me or ranking me first on your ranked choice voting, I would say, look, if you think things are going great in this city and the career politicians are doing a good job running this city and you want another one, that's everybody else in the field. If you're fed up and want someone with a business background who knows how to manage things well and who is not beholden to the system, who's an outsider, and who will therefore be fighting every day for what's best for New Yorkers, not for the special interests who elected him, I'm the only guy in the race that fits that category.
Yep.
You're a biker and your bike was stolen.
Yes.
What's your view on enforcement police enforcement against the bikers who go the wrong way. They don't have lights on their bikes at night.
Through red
They
lights.
get angry at the pedestrians. They almost run down.
Yeah.
What would you do about that, being a biker?
Yeah.
Yourself.
I think there's a difference between the bikes and the e-bikes. Of course, we should be enforcing against anyone on a bike or a scooter or whatever who's running red lights and endangering pedestrians and all of that. But I think, again, I would tackle the e-bike problem first because e-bikes are much heavier, they're much faster. And so I think every e-bike, whether it's a delivery person, because they're even heavier e-bikes they're carrying big things like people have been killed by getting hit by these bikes, so they should have to be registered and have insurance. And the companies like the DoorDashes of the world and all, we need a lot of these delivery guys are put under these impossible time schedules where they have to make X number of deliveries an hour that basically require them to blow through red lights and go extra and go dangerously fast. So I'd be holding the companies. If some delivery guy hits somebody, I'd go after the company that hired that guy, not just that guy.
Well, that's a good point because they're considered independent contractors.
Yeah.
And that's how the people they work for get off the hook.
Yeah, well, that might work in terms of how they're paid and not getting overtime or whatever. But in terms of liability, I'd be going after the companies that are hiring them because those delivery guys have their apps and their phones that are run by the companies that force them to go at very high speeds.
But what about the pedal bikes?
Oh, the city bikes.
Yeah, like you had your own bicycle.
Yeah.
Let's say you go down the wrong way.
Well, the other thing I would do, by the way, is on any e-bike, you can put it can be built into the bike in the software that it can only go a certain speed. They're speed gated, such that if somebody wants to go 25 miles an hour and they floor it, it can only go 15 or 16, right? So that's another thing I would require of all e-bikes in New York City.
But the regular bikes are regulated, believe it or not, by the New York City traffic regulations.
Yeah.
So if you're on a bicycle and you go through a red light, you can get a summons just like a motor vehicle.
Yeah.
Would you be willing to enforce the traffic regulations when it comes to pedal bike violators?
I wouldn't, given that we are understaffed right now and there's all sorts of people out there committing mayhem, I would stopping just a regular cyclist who goes through a red light, I wouldn't be allocating huge amounts of police resources to that. I think we got a lot of other bigger fish to fry in the city now. I totally agree with you that there should be a public information campaign and other things to encourage cyclists to ride more safely.
Although manpower is down, we have the NYPD traffic agents.
Yes.
They can enforce that.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting thing. Could you have the cameras that are catching the cars? Could they also catch bicycles? Like if the e-bikes all had to have like a little license plate or something that could enable them. But I'm not sure how you do that with the bikes, just regular
Well, let me
bikes.
give you an example. Let's say you're a police officer in a quiet precinct.
Yeah.
And you're on foot in the corner. And a bicyclist comes the wrong way.
Yeah.
Why should that police officer not be able to give that person a summons?
Oh, yeah. I completely agree with you on that. It's just a question of, would I take 10 guys in that precinct to go stake out and catch cyclists on the sidewalk or, running a red light?
Maybe the part-time police officers could do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Or the traffic
well, that's
agents.
an interesting question. Could you hire, people who don't have the power to arrest, because you're generally not arresting someone, but would have the power to write a ticket?
Yeah.
And so it wouldn't be full paid, very expensive NYPD officers, but you could have people sort of staking out and, writing people summons.
Well,
maybe.
Those are the traffic agents. They have the power to write
Even during the
summonses.
summer, college kids.
Yeah.
Give the college kid a job.
Yeah.
They do it down the Jersey Shore and
But the bike crowd will go crazy.
Yeah. Well,
Especially the Central
I've
Park
been
is-
riding my bike in the city, almost every day for 30 plus years, and I can tell you it's gotten a lot more dangerous out there.
Oh, yeah.
These e-bikes and these scooters are heavy, they're fast,
Yeah.
and it used to be, I always have to keep my eye out for cars, trucks, and pedestrians. But now a lot of these e-bikes and scooters,
Right.
big scooters, fast scooters, have made it quite a bit more dangerous out there.
Unless you stay in Central Park, you're okay.
Yes.
Much better than the street
Yes,
anyway.
though my wife got hit by a cyclist. Sometimes these cyclists on $10,000 high-speed bikes treat Central Park like a velodrome. A couple years ago, my wife got hit by one middle of noon on a Saturday. Lots of traffic crossing the Park Drive up there at about 97th Street, and a young guy came. It's a corner there. It's a particularly dangerous corner. Hit her. Threw her 10 feet into a bush, gave her a concussion, could have killed her. She was very fortunate that she landed in a bush. That's what saved her.
Oh, thank God.
And so there are particular spots like that where putting up a speed bump and a warning light and all might help solve that problem.
Yeah. Wow.
But yeah, putting a few people in Central Park and catching folks, the cyclists, like there's a 25 mile an hour speed limit for cars, right? Mm-hmm. These cyclists are going 35, right? That's super dangerous.
Too fast. Well, Whitney, any last words?
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's good to be among friends. I'm thoroughly disgusted with how my party, was, chanting defund the police and all a few years ago. We should be doing the exact opposite. I'm a firm believer that the overwhelming majority of police officers are in it for the right reasons, want to protect their communities, and are literally risking their lives to do so. And we should honor them and make sure that we have the very best in our city. And so enough of this foolish rhetoric, this anti-police rhetoric, and let's fix the management issues from the very top, from the mayor's office and in the senior levels of the NYPD to support the sort of beat level cops such that they can again feel proud of what they're doing, love their job, and stay and let's rebuild the force that's gotten depleted here. So those are all things I'm committed to doing as mayor.
Captain?
Well, I find you a most interesting fellow with a Republican attitude, even though you're a Democrat.
Yes.
And we wish you the best in the primary.
Common sense Democrat.
Yes.
Common sense Democrat.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.
Well, Whitney Tilson, Democrat for mayor, we wish you luck. We hope to have you on again before the election. So thank you so much, and good luck with your election. Until next time, I'd like to thank everyone for listening to Cop Talk. You could follow us on X at Cop Talk WABC. That's at Cop Talk WABC. And until next time, God bless you, God bless America, God bless military throughout the country, and also God bless law enforcement throughout the world. Captain?
And don't forget that you can also view this episode on YouTube.
Thank you. Till next time, be safe.